to welcome all my listeners to this episode of Who Gets the China, where, as you all know, we're working on saving our sanity while we're also caring for our aging parents. And I am really excited to have as my guest today, Kathleen Korpela. She is the founder of Living Goldenwell, Caregiving from the Middle. And it's basically an elder care community for women of our ages, really, roughly 40 to 60, I'm going to say, who are caring for their aging parents and providing us resources, support, and community so that we can do that really well. I wanted to note too that Kathleen, you've had a successful corporate career, as I feel like many of us at this age group have, where we've done the corporate world and now are seeking ways to put our expertise to use in other beneficial ways for our community. And so I know that you had a career at Starbucks, you've been featured on USA Today, you've been on lots of different podcasts sharing your expertise on supporting aging parents. So I'm just really grateful and pleased to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you. What a warm welcome.
One thing that I loved about when I went to your website and was doing a deeper dive before we had this conversation, where it's this idea of a place where women in the middle can feel seen, understood, and equipped to manage the complexities of caring for aging parents while sustaining their own well-being. I mean, this is me 100%. And I will say the sandwich generation term, I don't love that. I know it's something that we're familiar with and it does capture it, but to me, it feels a little bit negative and messy and chaotic. And so I loved this in the middle. So can you just tell me for a minute, like, how did that concept come to you?
It came to me because number one, I guess I'm kind of with you. I didn't want to use the term sandwich generation. I mean, there's many women in my community who aren't in the sandwich generation, but it really is kind of a recognition of the place and the stage of life where women are at, where they might be raising families and still having kids at home and supporting aging parents, and then also having other competing demands on their time, like their careers, and they have marriages and spouses and relationships and other interests. And so there's this sort of notion that when we step into this sort of elder care phase of life, it very much feels like we are in the middle of so much going on. So that's really where kind of I guess the genesis of the name of my community, Caregiving from the Middle, kind of resonated and came from, without really talking about sandwich generation, because
Yeah.
there's women in the sandwich generation, there's women that's not. So
No, I feel like I'm not a slab of ham or roast beef. You know? So I don't know. I don't feel like it's giving us the respect that we deserve. So I would love to learn more about your personal journey to founding Living Goldenwell. And then I know that your dad had Alzheimer's and that you were a caregiver for him. And if you're willing to sort of share some of how that story brought you to this, I'd love to learn more about that.
I'm happy to share because I know my story can really resonate, I think, maybe with other people who have been through caregiving journeys for an aging parent. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia almost 8 years ago. He passed away last year, a little over a year ago, as a result of the dementia. And when he was diagnosed, I had two kids. I had a 4.5-year-old and a 6-month old.
Oh my goodness.
And so I sort of, not to keep, I was in the middle,
You were
sandwich
really in
generation
the
in the
middle.
middle. I was deep in the middle
Yeah.
when this found me. And his diagnosis really came as a bit of a shock to our family and to my brothers. My parents were divorced. My dad was remarried. But it really came as a shock to us. And I think on hindsight, it really came as a shock, partially because number one, I didn't know. I was uneducated and unprepared. I didn't know anything about dementia. I didn't know the signs of cognitive impairment. And then also I was probably admittedly in denial about what the reality of probably what was happening. So a little bit of denial, fear, not knowing what to do. And so when he was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I think that's really when it kind of catapulted our family into into a big life change and a big life shift of, okay, what do we do now and what do we do about this? Anyway, so long story short, I ended up being kind of one of his caregivers along with my older brother who was coordinating care kind of in the financial and legal aspects. But of course, lived, he ultimately lived geographically much closer to me. And so I was really the point of contact. And I sometimes joke that, I had a 6 month old and 6 months later, I acquired a third child that I was completely unprepared for. And so anyway, that catapulted me into caregiving for an aging parent and, one with dementia. And so it was a long journey. And I realized through that whole almost 8 year experience, caring for an aging parent is really a role and an experience that reshapes our lives. And it's hard to overstate just how profound the experience is until you're sort of really in it, going through it, or, maybe after your parent has passed on, and you're sort of have more maybe space and place to really reflect on the whole experience. But it was really through that experience that I realized firsthand how little support and resources there are for family caregivers for adult children that are supporting aging parents. And that's across men and women. But that was really the genesis for me founding this company, Living Goldenwell, and creating the community, the elder care community for women that I have now. And I focus it on women because I'm very passionate about serving women in this area of their lives where they are so underserved and that where there's just such a massive gap in the market for this as well.
As many of us know, there's the whole eldest daughter syndrome,
Mhm.
and I don't know the statistics, I probably should know, but the vast majority of caregiving falls to
To the
daughters.
woman. That's right, to the daughter.
I don't know if it's because we raise our hands or nobody else does and we jump in to fill it. I'm sure there's lots of smart people who have done good work on that. But you're right. Our group chats probably like yours, like mine. It's lots of conversation amongst my friends of like, oh my gosh, this thing happened with my mom or my dad, right? What do I do? And my husband, I mean, his parents have passed now and he's the
Mhm.
youngest of seven. So that was a whole different dynamic. But I don't, he admits like, I was not nearly as engaged as my sisters. It's
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah.
not because I didn't want to be, but I guess I didn't know how. Anyway, I feel like
Yeah.
that's common. So building this community for women, that feels like the most dominant need right now.
Yes, it is. And I
Yeah.
will say, today, in 2025, there's quite a bit of research out there about the state of family caregivers, unpaid family caregivers in the United States. And so today there's around 63 million unpaid family caregivers that are caring for an aging loved one. 61% are women. And in the middle slash sandwich generation, it's 70%
Mm.
women. And it is true what you're saying, Kirsten, generally speaking, if there is a daughter in the family, if she is the eldest, or if she is the geographically closest to the parent or the parents, most of the burden of the care, whether that's logistic, administrative, or healthcare otherwise, falls to the daughter.
What led to you guys deciding there needed to be an assessment for your
Mm,
dad?
yeah, it's interesting. I can share a couple of stories. There were some specific instances where his behavior was out of character. And at the time, I didn't, again, because I didn't know the signs of dementia, I didn't know the signs of cognitive decline. That's actually part of our learning curriculum that we have in our community is we give some dementia education 101. Understanding the signs of cognitive impairment is really, really important. But he started doing things that were out of character. And so, for example, I had my son and my son Nico, and we were he didn't come to the my dad didn't come to the hospital to meet my son. We said, well, we're going to come home from the hospital tomorrow. Meet us at home. We'll be home around 12 noon, but come at like 1 or 2 so we have some time to get settled. I was bringing home a newborn. And I remember we pulled up to the house and he was there waiting for us. And it turns out he had been waiting there for 3 hours.
Oh
And
my gosh.
my dad's a very punctual person. And so I was like, oh, hey, like, what are you doing
Yeah, right.
here? Again, it was a behavior that was out of
Right.
character for him.
Okay.
And he sort of played it off of like, oh, I just couldn't wait to see you, blah, blah, blah. But there was something deep inside of me that was like, no, Dad, that's not like him. He's a very
Mm-hmm.
punctual person. When, you know your parent best, right? You know your parent well. It's like these things that are out of character. And that was a big kind of warning sign for me. A month or so later, I was taking my son for a walk and I was called my dad, or we were on a phone call, and we were just kind of having a check-in. And he goes, "How you doing, sweetheart?" And he's like, "How is that son of yours? What's his name again?" And I thought, "Oh, well, his name's Nico, Dad. His name's Nico." And I thought to myself, you don't forget your grandson's name, your newborn grandson's name.
Right.
Again,
Right.
completely out of character.
Mm.
And so it was kind of moments and instances over kind of a course of like 6, 9, 12 months where my brother and I have an older brother and younger brother. It was mostly my older brother and I kind of were sort of comparing notes a little bit of like, that's a little too out of character type of a thing. And so that's when we sort of knew it was really kind of time to have a conversation with him. And we actually talked a little bit with uh his wife, he's remarried, who wasn't my mom, and she actually, her mother had Alzheimer's dementia as well. And so fortunately there was sort of somebody in the family who had gone through a dementia experience with a loved one and sort of knew, if you
Hmm.
will. And
Okay.
it was really her that sort of pushed him to go to his doctor and talk about his short-term memory issues, what was going on, and actually get an assessment. And so it was kind of a culmination over, let's call it a year or so. I mean, these can go on for a long time, but it was really sort of a series of events that sort of led to that.
So I'm curious it sounds like it was not easy to get him to go get the assessment. If it took a year, maybe, or maybe once somebody mentioned it, but I think for myself and a lot of other people, it's starting saying the thing, right? And I've had
Mhm.
some things with my mom has been willing to get assessments. She's pretty fine. But my dad, a couple things have happened
Yeah.
and I've said, maybe you should get an assessment. Maybe we should look into this. He's like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. It was a one-time thing. So I'm fascinated by how do you get over the hump? What was the
Mm.
thing that finally got him to the doctor, or how did you get that to happen?
We had a conversation with his wife because we knew that his wife would be the strongest sort of influential force to make that happen. And so I think, kind of thinking about maybe your listeners out there who are maybe struggling with this type of a scenario, think about who might be the strongest sort of influencer for either your mom or your dad or even your in-laws. Maybe it's what's on your mind is your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, right? So if that's your husband or another family member, it's sort of thinking about who has that relationship where they really can say, look, I think this needs to happen. You should do this. Um, you know, and again, every situation is a little bit different, but it's sort of like figuring out who's got kind of that relationship with the person to really tell them they need to make this happen.
I'm thinking, what if the relationship is with yourself? And you have to be the one to broach it, right? Because you're that person.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's perfectly fair and appropriate. I mean, depending on your relationship with your parent, but if you are, close with them or whatever, to bring it up and to talk about it and to see if that's something they want to do. Or if that's something that maybe they should do. The other thing too is if you find out if your, dad or your parent is going to be having a doctor's appointment, meeting with a doctor, um, trying to get in touch with that doctor beforehand, at least to connect with them and have a brief conversation about your concerns or what you're seeing or observing, so that when your parent goes to that appointment, they're actually maybe hearing that from the doctor from a third party
Mhm.
and not from a family member. that's another sort of tactic or a trick to kind of employ that can actually be quite effective too.
The thing about a third party, and I've heard this from a lot of other experts I've talked to, it's the same very sage, very wise advice. There's no emotion there, or different
Mm,
emotion, less
mhm.
emotion. And so it can be a
Sure.
more, objective conversation. Whereas, especially parent-child dynamic, I mean, we're talking about a lot of major shifts in
Yes.
the power dynamic, the responsibility, the maturity. There's a lot that's connected there, and I think that can make it fraught. So finding that trusted third party is good advice. What are some of the things that, as you embarked on your caregiving journey, in hindsight, you wish you knew? Critical things to know as you head into this phase of life.
I wish I would have understood and knew just how important it is to be prepared and educated and knowledgeable. Because being, unprepared and uneducated, ignorant on certain things, I think really cost me and cost my dad as well. It was very, very painful kind of being in a sort of a reactive mode where we were essentially reacting to this diagnosis really unprepared. Because I didn't really know about dementia. I hadn't I didn't know of places and spaces where I could really get this type of information and really sort of be equipped to know even what were the signs, how could you broach conversations with your parent about this, or what might be angles to influence them, around getting a diagnosis. And I think also because my dad himself hadn't planned um, in terms of his kind of retirement, his future care needs,
Mm-hmm.
he really lost his ability to have a choice in his living and care arrangements once this dementia diagnosis, once it really started to take hold of him. And, I think the family in general, I think really lost our ability to kind of feel in control, if you will, over what was happening and all the transitions that we were experiencing. And so I think for me, I think just the importance of having basic education, a basic support network where you know you could go to actually ask questions when things come up is something I wish I really would have known and known about when I was stepping into this. I think the other thing that I wish I would have known or understood when I kind of stepped into this phase and chapter of my life is that multiple truths can coexist, meaning, you can be scared about what's coming or unsure or fearful or uncertain, or maybe grieving the reality of the aging and decline and mortality of your parent. And you can also choose intentionally and consciously to continue to experience the joy, the good times, the relationship that you have with your parent, if you have a good one, if you have a healthy one, as well. And while they're still here, I think it's no one really told me this when I was sort of stepping into this and when I was sort of an early stage caregiver, was that you can feel frustrated or exhausted or burnt out or, name your sort of hard emotion. And you can also choose to see some of the more positive aspects and continue to focus on the interpersonal relationship and the time that you do have with your parent, and focus on what they're still able to do,
Mm-hmm.
how you could still spend time with them, how they are still capable. I think it's so important to think about how you can hold these sort of dual dual realities and dual truths about this phase of life. And I didn't understand that. For a long time, I was really focused on the weight of sort of my grieving, my anticipatory grieving, the frustration that I felt on why was this happening to me now? And I think because of that, I wasn't focused on being as present as I probably could be in the time that I was interacting with my dad or visiting with him and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as the nature of our relationships with our parents evolve. I think that, and they continue from, from dependence to independence on their decline. We have a really incredible opportunity, I think, to really enjoy a new dynamic, right, with them. But I think that that's possible when we are prepared and when we are in the right mindset to be able to do that and to really meet them there. And that means that, kind of other matters or other logistics or decisions around their care and living arrangements or legal or estate plans have been taken care of, or at least maybe thought through or talked through in order to create that space in our lives to be able to focus on the human aspect of the relationship.
For me, that crystallizes a lot of what I've heard from so many people coming at this from different angles, which is this time is precious. And when you are frustrated and in the thick of it and trying to solve critical problems, you cannot appreciate and value that time. And I mean, even for me, just thinking about it, a lot of where Who Gets the China came from is this overwhelm of having to declutter and downsize all the things that your
Yeah,
parents
that's another perfect example. Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And when you're spending hours trying to be like, oh my gosh, mom, okay, let's get rid of, like, you've got 5 colanders. Let's get rid of 3. You only need 2. Or you've got, 400 greeting cards that we've saved over our whole life. Like I've had to have grace with myself to say, let's take advantage of these sessions and try to, like, really share the stories, what's important. And I've learned so many funny anecdotes or things about my parents' life together that I never would have, right? And so it's sort of jumping in to say, this is the thing that's going to have to get done. And I know some of it's going to have to just get done later in a very different fashion. But instead of stressing about it, like, how can you embrace it at least as much as you can?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, so well articulated, Kirsten. And that's, I think, just a perfect example. Decluttering and going through your parents' house and stuff can be a very frustrating experience. But that's a perfect example of how we can continue to consciously make choices about how we feel about a particular situation or a particular moment, right? Where on one hand, you can say, this is very frustrating. This is going to be a process. But also, you know what? Let me not see if I can spend a little bit of time here with my mom, having her share a little bit on some of these artifacts or whatnot, right? And that's also a way, just sort of kind of running with this example, to kind of get their buy-in, if you will. Parents are sometimes, we think of these as, we're all corporate, professionals here, and we think about how do we influence our stakeholders, right? And getting buy-in. And that's another way about how do we meet our parents where they're at with their needs, right? And how they might want to share about stories or feel that emotional connection to these items, as sort of a pathway through making that decision about what to do with said item.
Hmm.
Right. And I think that that's just, it's a great example. Yeah.
I do a lot of change management in my other work. And so what you just said really resonates, right? It's the same principles, and
The
getting
same
people
principles.
comfortable with change and getting buy-in and meeting people where they are. So if we could just be better at applying all of our work expertise to our family life, that'd be great. One thing that I want to talk about with you, because I know this is an area of expertise that you have, is um, sort of setting boundaries
Mm,
as a way to encourage self-care. And I know you have a great 4-step framework, and if we want to back up and kind of give an overview of that, but I think, at least for myself, what I have struggled with is I get frustrated with things because I get sucked in, not because anybody's demanding it of me, but because I want to do the right thing. And then I've now maybe spent too much time on this thing, or I've gotten into it too deeply, and I don't really need to be in that deep. And I need to be able to set a boundary for myself that's like, okay, you've done enough on reorganizing all their bank accounts and getting the power of attorney set up. You can only be expected to do so much. I mean, that's just one example. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the framework if you want to start there, or even just boundaries as self-care strategy.
I'll touch on boundaries. I'm so glad you asked this because it's just such a big area. I think about boundaries as the invisible lines that kind of define where you end and others begin. And so they're really intended to protect your physical and emotional well-being while allowing you to show up authentically in each area, of your life. When it comes to kind of setting boundaries with yourself, there's a number of different examples depending on, what you need in your life. But we can think about things like rest boundaries or guilt boundaries. So a rest boundary could be something like, I will stop checking work emails after 8 p.m. Right? So it's sort of a boundary and a commitment that we're making to ourselves, or maybe a guilt boundary, or what I call an identity boundary could be something more like, the guilt boundary is, I recognize that feeling guilty doesn't serve me or those I care for, right? So how might I reframe how I think about maybe or cope with my guilt? Um, and when I think about setting boundaries with ourselves, it touches so much on our inner dialogue, our internal narrative, and our inner critic. And I have a four-part framework, and taming our inner critic is actually step two. It's part two of that four-part framework that we talk about. It's so important how we frame our thoughts and our situations, and that is related to how we might set boundaries for ourselves.
It is very easy to feel like I'm not doing enough,
Hmm.
or I didn't handle that conversation the best way that I could, right? I mean, this is just this affects us in many aspects of life. In this space, I think it does, especially because someone else's livelihood is at stake. We really want our parent to get the best care, have the highest quality
Right?
of
We want the
life.
best for our parent. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's like pressure on it in a way that just your normal day-to-day life, it's like, well, that will come around again. I can do a better job. But these decisions feel really important. And so it's easy to criticize yourself. But kind of what you're
Very,
saying is like, there's no benefit in that. That's not helping you.
there's no benefit in that. It is not helping us. But also, we have to go through a process of sort of, accepting what we might be experiencing, but also becoming aware of where, again, our inner narrative and our inner critic isn't helping us or isn't serving us. And then consciously, when we become aware of that, it presents us an opportunity to respond differently to that and to choose a different narrative, or to choose what we are going to tell ourselves about a particular situation. I think that our inner narrative, right, and what we are telling ourselves about something is critical. And we have more choice and agency in that than sometimes we recognize or understand.
My therapist has been talking with me about these cognitive distortions, right?
Mm,
Maybe you know about these. I don't know, but they're common stories we tell ourselves about things
yeah,
that probably aren't really true. And so it's
yeah,
that same thing about like, how do you give yourself the freedom to tell yourself a different story
yeah,
and reinforce, like, okay, you're doing the best you can. You weren't trained for this. Nothing's going to be perfect. You're just making the best decisions with the information you have now, and kind of giving yourself that praise and that break, because you're might not going to get it from someplace else, right? Like, this
yeah.
is not a job that anybody's giving you a raise for doing.
There's no easy answers to this, and there's no straight answers to this. These are very nuanced. But I will say, these types of topics, the emotional journey, our inner narrative and what we're experiencing, the women in my community and community members, we talk a lot about this and we discuss it. And it's incredibly valuable to hear from other women who are going through it.
I went to a recently a conference that was hosted by the University of Colorado. They have a multidisciplinary center on aging that is doing really incredible work. And one of the
Mm.
keynote speakers was kind of talking about this, especially in caregiving, just the opportunity to build connection with other people is very empowering, very healing, like really just a critical part of that journey. And I think for a long time, women bore this responsibility kind of in silence, right? It's not new
Mhm.
that women have been caregiving for their
That's
elders.
right.
This has been going on since the beginning of time.
Mhm.
But now I feel like we're in this place where it's okay to talk about it, okay to acknowledge like this is really hard or this is painful. And so it feels like that's like you're building on that knowledge. The connection and that community is key to survival.
I completely agree, Kirsten. And I will say that, I mean, supporting aging parents and elder caregiving is actually happening all around us. Whether we recognize it or not, whether we know it or not, whether it's kind of happening to us or not. And I will say that, and I'm kind of talking, in our culture in the United States in general, but I think we have a long ways to go to normalize conversations and where we're talking about aging parents and aging and decline, and all of these topics around, elder care is normalized and is talked about. I think in corporate America, companies they really struggle to support employees with elder caregiving responsibilities. There aren't a lot of employee resource groups. There aren't a lot of places and spaces for family caregivers or women to gather where this is being talked about. And it could very well be the case that you maybe don't have, amongst your own network, your network of friends, or even maybe your spouse, if they're not going through it with maybe their parents, it's really hard to relate. Just the connection piece alone. Is such a powerful coping mechanism for the loneliness and the isolation that people feel when they're going through this. There aren't many spaces and places where I think this is being talked about so openly. I just think we have so far to go
Hmm.
in that. But it is just such a powerful healing mechanism to connect deeply with another person who can truly empathize and relate to what you are going through.
Yeah, and give you some useful advice.
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
in that topic, I one of the things that I think I was hoping to pick your brain a little bit about was having difficult conversations
Mm.
with your parents. And we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about your dad, but I'm curious this part of the conversation I'm very curious about because I know there's lots of things that I want to talk about and I want to cover. And I know I need to be prepared and for them to be prepared.
Yeah.
But like to what we were saying earlier, sometimes I don't want to spend my limited time talking about that. It's like I have dinner with my parents. I want to like let's share memories. Let's talk about other things. I don't want to be
Yeah.
constantly talking about like, okay, how's the walking? Or how's your balance? What's going on with the PT? And so I guess just looking for some of your expertise about how might the community or your expertise help coach us through having some meaningful conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big topic, such a big topic. So the three principles that I usually will coach and talk for people to keep in mind is to prioritize active listening. So no matter how we might frame a particular topic or a discussion with our parent, it's important that we offer them the sensitivity that they need and deserve, right? Hearing from them so that there is a two-way dialogue is really, really important. So that, you hear them and they hear you. I think the other second principle is giving yourself grace and kind of being gentle with yourself and realistic about what's possible. Because the truth is, it's very complicated. It can be very complicated to talk with even other family members, your siblings, about your parents' situation, or maybe your spouse or your husband about the in-laws. Um, when everyone has different opinions and everyone has different sort of concerns or things that are important to them. And so I think it's maybe easy to feel tension or feel some guilt about not doing things right or not doing things quite right, but being understanding with yourself about how to broach these conversation topics or how to kind of navigate in these family dynamics is really, really important. And I think the third principle around conversations to keep in mind is to understand that to the degree you can make them feel natural, and again, conversational two-way dialogue versus interrogating or versus pushing. Now, again, every interfamily dynamic is different. Every parent is different. You might have some listeners who are like, well, you don't know my parent, type of thing. And so there's, many different
Right.
tactics for
Right.
different styles of communication and different parenting. But I think one of the keys to keep in mind is approaching a conversation or a topic with a genuine curiosity about your parents' perspective, right, versus maybe trying, leading with, solutions.
And as you're talking about this, I'm reflecting on conversations that I've had in the past and opportunities where I think I have gotten a lot better at this of asking questions, like leading with a question,
Leading with curiosity.
hey
Yeah.
mom, like it seems like your desk is like kind of there's a lot here. I mean, could I help you tidy it so you can find things more easily? Um,
Yep.
sometimes the
Yep.
answer is yes, and sometimes it's no, and then you have to honor that no and maybe come back with something like, okay, well, would it, if I came over next week, would you want to deal with it? Or something like that, honoring the answer, even if you might not like it,
Yeah.
which can be
Honoring
hard.
the answer
Yeah.
and coming back at it maybe at a different time, and through a different angle, right? Yeah, and I'd say, I talk about some other tips I kind of share in conversational frameworks, touching on the topic of timing. I think timing matters tremendously, right? Where and when you might choose to kind of bring up something, right? And sometimes that could be a moment when maybe just the two of you have some privacy and there's no time pressure. Or it might actually be like in a group setting with your siblings if you're sitting around talking. But timing, I think, and the time and the place can make a big difference. Starting with maybe your own kind of vulnerability or your own experiences. And so can kind of be an entryway into a conversation topic. So maybe if you might bring up talking about your own experiences with your estate planning or concerns about, your future. Hey, sharing about yourself and then sort of using that as maybe an opening to ask your parent, about their particular situation
Yeah,
can
I
be
love
can
that.
be a way to sort of open the topic. Oh, hey, mom or dad, I was actually, I was working on, my estate plan. Um, I'm curious, like, where are you guys with that? Or
Hmm.
like, it just made me think that we hadn't talked about it.
Yeah.
And then let them see what they say, right? There's ways to sort of talk about it for yourself and then use that as kind of an opening to whatever that topic is.
Yes, and 100%. And I think the timing of it, you really have to be proactive about it because there's not a lot of window sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to the degree that you can be thoughtful and proactive about it. And, again, if you are geographically remote from your parents, you have a tight window. So if you're visiting them over the holidays, it might be a perfect opportunity to have a conversation in person with them, or at least broach it, right? And
Hmm.
then continue that later.
Yeah.
But the timing is hard, but it can pay off if you just take a step back and say, okay, like what's maybe one or two things that I want to kind of have this goal of making some progress and talking with my parents on. How might I think about doing that, knowing what I know about my parents and our schedules and what I need? How might we go about doing that? What works best for my family and my situation?
I love to ask people if they've had an aha moment. or two
Mm.
in their transition, either from child to caregiver or in the work that they're now finding themselves doing in this space. And so I just wonder, like, have there been any kind of aha moments that resonate with you?
Well, an aha moment, I will say, kind of earlier on, was realizing the role reversal. You know your relationship to your parent. You're the child, they are the parent. That's the normal traditional interpersonal relationship. And then when you start supporting your parent, you start having conversations with them, they need more help and care. That's the beginning stages of this role reversal where you step increasingly into parenting your parent. And that is very uncharted territory. And so that was, I would say for me, a hard aha moment because, oh my gosh, nobody told me that was coming. I didn't have a space and a place. I didn't have the information to know that a role reversal was even a thing.
Right, right.
And so I think that was a big kind of aha moment for me that I wish I would have understood and had resources and support to just sort of kind of cope with it and process that role reversal a little bit more, and also process it from the perspective of how do I balance these now dual identities where I am still my parents' daughter. I'm still the adult child, right? But also I am playing a bit of a parenting role here. And in what circumstances or situations can I just be the daughter? Do I want to just be the daughter? I want that relationship. And then what are maybe circumstances or situations where I do need to take more of a parenting like role in my interaction or in these situations.
To your point, we don't know it's coming,
We don't know
right?
what's coming,
Yeah.
and it's just not talked about. Again, it's just not talked about nearly enough, and it's just, but it is so profound and so life-changing. Yeah.
And it kind of goes back for me to what you were talking about in the beginning of two things can be true, right? You can be the
Mm.
daughter and the child, and you can have to also behave as the adult or the parent, if you
Yes.
will. Is there anything else that you want to share that I didn't ask about? And I definitely want to give you an opportunity just to direct people to your community and let them know where to find out more if they're interested.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation, Kirsten. I really appreciate it. What I want to emphasize with, the folks that have been listening to this, if this has really been resonating with them, is three things. I would say number one, you're not alone, right? You're not alone in what you are going through or what you are experiencing. There are women out there just like yourself going through these same experiences and these same challenges. And so it is so important to have a place to connect with them. One, like my caregiving from the middle community, again, to really cope with that loneliness and that isolation. And then secondly, you do not have to struggle or stay stuck. There is a different and a better way forward navigating many of the topics that we talked about, emotional journey, practical aspects, and you can learn new things and show up equipped to kind of navigate through this next phase and experience in your life more equipped. And then thirdly, I would say that it is important to like trust in a model that can bring together community and learning, because I think we've touched on kind of like the planning and the educational kind of components, and then also the community and the connection, kind of that peer learning, that peer connection with others. So that model that brings together both community and learning is comprehensive, right? So that it can really help support you in a full way. I think is really, really important. Hopefully you will share in some of the show notes about
Yes,
my website,
I will.
www.livinggoldenwell.com. It's just a wonderful community that I would really invite your listeners to check out and join us there.
I love it. I have having been on your website, I know it's got lots of good information and resources just right there and definitely worth checking out. So, well, I have loved our conversation today. I so appreciate you being generous with your time and your expertise and sharing it with me and my listeners as we continue on our journey of supporting our aging parents.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten. This was such a lovely conversation.
Who Gets the China is written and hosted by Kirsten Mao, produced by Aaron Bryce of Blue Ogden Productions. Our theme music is composed by Greg Fellman of Wind Sand Productions. Our cover art is by Jen Beam of Gigawatt Studio. For more stories and expert advice, follow along on Substack or at www.whogetsthechina.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might appreciate the conversation. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.